That motion, all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Right, recommendations Environment Services Committee. I'll get Councillor Graham, no I'm only tricking, to take us through that. Councillor Bevan, who stepped up at short notice, would you like to talk a little bit about that? He quite enjoyed it, he said. You might have to scrap him to get back in there. With your microphone, please.
Perhaps if I can just highlight one or two of the key discussion points from that meeting. The first was the presentation of a couple of optional development plans for the Pakawai, or the opposite, the piece across the road from the current Pakawai park, country park. The idea is to make it, the existing park is dog friendly, and the idea I think is to make the part across the road dog exclusive. We have an opportunity to purchase some land that is necessary to the development, which in fact the Hastings District Council is proposing to purchase, and we would purchase part of it from them. And there was a request to give the Chief Executive authority to do those negotiations, which was approved by the committee. We also received two reports and one operational plan. The operational plan was land management, and the reports were on soil quality and current state of biodiversity. The three reports actually were interlinked. They were really interesting reports, and there were quite a number of questions and comments on those reports. So the request is that those reports and the operational plan be received and approved. And probably the only other thing I should draw Council's attention to is from the minor items. There was some discussion on the current status of Lochinvar Station. Councillors will recall that the station is currently the subject of a purchase agreement to the same Chinese entity that owns the Crayfar Farms, and there is an OIO request currently being considered by the government, and questions raised as to concerns raised perhaps about the possible impact of foreign ownership of that land, and concerns about the environment in relation to that. Staff reported to us that in fact only a small proportion of that land, something like 20%, is actually in our area. The rest is in the Bay of Plenty Regional Council area, and in fact only half of the area of the part in our area is actually
9%.
9%, yes.
The farmland is in our catchment.
Correct, yes. So, and the comment was that the current management practices on that farm are good, and the interaction with our staff is positive. So, and also the comment that they are working with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council on the matter. So, unless other people want to comment, Chair, they were pretty much the key things that were raised during the course of the meeting.
Okay, well, the only other one that wasn't there was Councillor Graham. Probably you got any questions, or pretty good?
The company that's buying Lochinvar, I just checked, they're raising money on the Hong Kong stock market to do that, so not exactly cash in hand.
Right, okay. Councillor Scott.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Because I
Certainly.
didn't give my apologies at that meeting. I had a funeral that day.
Oh, of course you did. Absolutely.
And that is with reference to use of the community facilities borrowing provision. Can I get clarity from Mr. Drury as to just how much money there is in that facility? And I thought that one was actually totally spent, and are we not borrowing this through the open spaces, which we're starting to commit to things like public consultation on oil and gas?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. The reading should be open space as part of that facility. You're quite right. The figure was 700,000. In the annual plan, 200,000 was put aside for the oil and gas plan research. There's 500,000 left, and I think Mr. Adie's presentation to that committee was that this money come out of the 500,000 open space allocation.
And just with regard to get a better handle on that, we have got a number of park plans coming up. Presumably they will be calling on some of that money too, is that right?
Yep.
How far does that money go around several times? Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, when we actually are looking at using this, we better get a plan for just what money is left and how we propose to stretch that, considering we've already agreed to take quite a significant chunk out for other purposes.
I believe Mr. Adey is working on that, are you not? Yep.
Yeah, so we can expect that at the next ENS meeting, will we?
Yeah, possibly not the next ENS committee, but certainly as part of your next long-term plan workshop.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's deal with it. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? Sorry.
Councillor Bevan's opening remarks about the new area being dog exclusive. So it's just dogs, is it?
I think it is. Excluded, I think he meant to say. Just let him go there.
Dog excluded, sorry.
Very close. Okay.
So, Chair, I'm happy to...
You happy to move? The
move,
recommendations there? Thank you. We have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Belford. You wish to speak?
Oh, just to advise that I'm still negotiating my management fee with Councillor Graham.
Good, and good luck with that. And Councillor Belford, you wish to speak?
I would just comment that you set a very high bar, and it's a shame that it wasn't recorded so that Councillor Graham could learn from it.
Right, getting out of shape here. Any other comment, discussion? I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Recommendations for Regional Planning Committee. Hand that over to the Chief Executive, I suppose. Oh, you weren't there, so that's not going to work, is it? Any questions in regard to that? You're happy to move, Councillor Scott? Thank you. We have a seconder. And thank you, Councillor Bevan. Discussion. Put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Right, the one of the smaller papers of the day.
Sorry,
oh.
a small matter. Doesn't require any discussion, but I'd like advice on item 4. Extends the office, the invitation to the Office of Treaty Settlements. Is that for the Chief Executive to do, and will she do that sometime?
Been done.
Yes,
Been
it's
done?
been done, yes, yeah.
We caught up with them at the Tūhoe signer. Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Very efficient.
well, it's just very opportunistic, I think, more the point. Okay, item 11, financial report. Now, there's my understanding, Mr. Drew, you're going to give us a bit of background, and perhaps some of the managers will give us some background before we get into the discussion. Do you want to just run through that first, or you just want questions as we go? Or?
No, I'm quite happy to provide a bit of background. As you say, Mr. Chairman, it does constitute most of the paper distributed for this agenda. And Mr. Collings, would you like to come up? What I'll do, councillors, is just run through some of the items in the council report leading into the financials, and that's...
So it's the council paper, page 35.
That's council paper, page 35, item 11. So there's 3 or 4 pages there. I'll just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go into the weight of paper behind that. So the purpose of this report is to provide explanations covering variances from, firstly, reforecast budgets, and then to annual plan budgets. And that's for the financial year ending 30th of June 2014. Further to that, you've got in your papers here the draft annual report that needs to be adopted today for forwarding to the Audit Office, which this report will form basis of their audit, and the final report will come back to you for your September meeting after the audit. So just running through what material you've got here, the attachment 1, which is in the big wad of paper here, that's the council financial overview. Now, the reason for this report is it's not part of the formal annual plan report that's published. But the reason we put this in, it deals with general funded activities. It's in the same style as you normally get. It covers comments against the reforecasting result as distinct from the annual plan, and it's divided up into the sections that we've put forward as a restyle financial reporting to this council, which incorporates operating account and scheme reserves, and then goes into balance sheet, and then into cash flow, and then into a little bit about capital. Now, attachment 2, which is a pretty big chunk of paper, is the draft annual report. It's going to be the published document when formally approved in September. Audit will go through it and come back to you on it. And in that draft annual report, there's a number of sections, the Chairman and Chief Executive commentary, which is in there. There's a little bit about financial reporting benchmarks, which is new this year, and Mr. Collins later on will take you through some of the reasons why that's in and what messages it provides. The next one, service performance information, is in there. It's always been in there. This is a group activity performance targets, which councillors 3 or 4 times a year run through. This is the year-end result for that. There's management statements, and then, of course, the majority of the report is the financial statements, which, as I've said, go to audit. Just a few points raised in this paper, just year-end matters. And this is page 36. The Regional Disaster Damage Reserve, we have a look at that once or twice a year. At the end of the year we do. I just remind you there in March 2014, a limit for this fund was set between 2.75 million and 3.75 million. In the paper there I give you an idea of what that fund's about, because it's not one we talk about a lot. But Mr. Adey did put a very comprehensive paper to Council, I think about 3 or 4 months ago, covering all those issues. So that's just a little bit of a reminder there about what that Regional Disaster Reserve is set up for. I indicate there that the market value of the investments held in that fund are 3 million. It's within the limits set up by Council, and that's even been achieved with 757,000 transferred from that reserve as a contribution to the rebuilding of the Macra Dam. So not a bad result there. Next part I'll look at is the revaluation of council assets. I go through what assets have been revalued this year and what asset groups are to be revalued at certain times. Just for your information, really, the infrastructure assets as a work are to be revalued for the 13-14 financial year, or the year that we're being reported on. The figures are not in there. I think it's completed, Manton, isn't it? Yeah, it should be finalised today, so it will actually be put in for the final audit. There was some delay in that one, but it is done and it will be in the final figures. Hydrology assets were revalued last year, and the policy is every 3 years. Operational assets every 3 years was revalued last year, but there's a comment there about the Council's administration building. Because of the work done on that, we wanted to have an idea of whether our book value was fair, a fair statement of value, and we asked our valuers to just give us a preliminary on that, and it is. The fair value from council value is 7.8 million, and our book value is 7.6. So, from an audit point of view, there's no impairment to show in that figure. That's for the council's building. Page 37, I cover investment properties, leasehold land, Napier leasehold land and Wellington leasehold land. There have been some increases in the valuation, modest ones. Napier leasehold 1.5 million increase, Wellington leasehold has gone up $500,000. Main reasons, continuing strengthening in land values, but nothing dramatic. Port of Napier shareholding, as you know, that's held by HBRC on council's behalf. Revalued every 3 years. Last revaluation was the 31st of March 2012, and it was revalued at that time at 177.4 million. Next revalue is 31st of March 2015, not too far away. Some high-level comments here about council's general general funded operating position, and we'll get back to that when we go into Appendix 1. But just very briefly, there's an unfavourable variance of 96,000 as against forecast, which is 0.001 of a $35 million expenditure budget. Not a bad result, and we'll come back to what makes up that when we go through Appendix 1. I mentioned there cash operating balances of councils and the level of those cash operating balances. So as you can see there that at the moment it's all subject to audit, but we believe the cash operating balances at the 30th of June 2014 will be in the order of 3.8 or 3.9 million at the end of 14-15. They'll be still quite healthy at 3.6 million, and that's for keeping the books or not requiring us to borrow for operations. So it's a sort of a working capital, and our policy is to keep some measure of working capital so as we don't need to go into overdraft. The last comment on that page notes that the operating statement in attachment 2, which is part of the annual report, that bottom line differs from the bottom line of the general funded operating position as shown in attachment 1, and the reasons for that. I always put those in just in case you look at an operating statement and the published accounts and think that differs from the financial information we given in appendix in attachment 1, which pertains to the general funded position, and there's reasons for that. There's loss and gains and fair value of assets and rates, capital rates, which we don't put into a general funded position because it's netted, whereas for formal annual accounting statements it needs to be income. So I just mentioned a couple of those so as you're not surprised by the difference. If we go over leaf now to page 38, I cover there just the operations group profit on external work. I make reference to the profit for the last financial year was 161,000. The previous year was 130, so that's a pleasing result for the operations group. And I've indicated there that their proposal is to retain 50,000 of that, and then the remaining 111,000 be transferred to council's operating cash balances for the business. They propose to retain 50,000 for operating their business, for the integrity of their business, and they've listed out there for me some of the areas that they need to do in order to ensure that the operations group functions going forward. They normally retain some amount of the external profit. So, Mr. Chairman, we've got the recommendations there. There's 3. Perhaps if council would like, they could.
Before we get there, just you had a specific question around that?
The specific question
Sure.
on the operations group. The proposal is to retain 50,000 against, and it gives a list of things. I took one look at that, and that's considerably more than 50,000, unless we can do work very much on the cheap.
For the items that are listed there, you mean?
Yes. From 22.1 to 5.
Councillor, no, that list came from the operations group.
Mr.
They
Chairman,
must have other
that's
funds.
great,
Integrity.
but
I'm sure it has
clearly
integrity.
there has to be, the funding there is considerably greater than that, so for completeness it would be helpful.
Yeah.
We don't suggest that 50,000 is going to cover all of that,
No.
but we don't know.
Yeah, the manager of the operations group isn't here to. Oh,
Incidentals.
Amanda's quite right. I mean, the capital is the actual renovations funded from a capital account. This here is just bits and pieces that they need to do to keep the business sort of functioning.
As I understood that, we have already funded the Guppy Road and paid for it. What I understood the $50,000 is to be the icing on the top to do some other things, not the substantive workers here. That's what I understand.
You're quite right, Councillor.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful to my fellow councillors explaining, and I fully understood that we had a capital amount for it, but it is actually stated quite clearly here that the external cladding, for instance, was not part of the build. So there are some items here that suggest that the amount that would be spent out of this is considerably more than 50,000. I'd like some clarity
So the
around
question
it,
is
please.
worth asking and worth
The
answering.
question is-
So we will get there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll certainly go back and say to him, is that 50 enough? And my understanding it is enough. He didn't ask for more. The cladding there, he will only do it if it's under 10,000. So I mean, Paul, the manager down there is not looking at big items.
Just to a follow-up question in relation to retaining some of those earnings, or them retaining some of those earnings, generally they come out ahead of budget each year, don't they, for income? Do they always retain the earnings, or have we had the full?
No, what they do, Mr Chairman, is retain a small amount of the earnings. The rest of the earnings goes into by council resolution, and the council resolution acknowledges that there is a profit for external work, and that amount, that profit then gets transferred into cash operating so as it can run council activities. What they've said here is then they need a small amount for their own operations group activities. So a small amount goes to their operational group activities. The bigger section comes over to council operating activities.
Out of interest, Paul, is that 101,000 surplus an offset against the end of year negative balance of 96,000?
No, Councillor, the 160,000 profit is in the statements in attachment 1. They're budgeted for and they come through.
Does that cover your question too, Councillor Hewitt? Or no, Councillor Hewitt?
Yeah, I have a problem with this as well. We've been given an incomplete piece of information and I'm not comfortable with it. So more specifically, are we being requested to approve a CapEx that's not been replaced, CapEx item that's not been replaced, and subsequently additional R&M expenses? It's just all a little bit wishy-washy for me. I thought in terms of...
In regard to the excavator you're talking about?
Yes, 22.5. And also, I mean, we approved considerable funding for the Guppy Road operation to be refurbished, so I would have thought that it was done once and done properly, not coming back for a little bit more here and there.
Certainly, Mr Chairman, the cladding is an issue. There's an opinion here that the external cladding needs some adjustment or additional to it. Oh, there's no CapEx in it, or the storage bins. I mean, my understanding is that the operations group has an operation to maintain, and there's bits and pieces that every year they put right, and this is an indication of some of those bits. Like when you're running a business, you need some working capital, and for us to take all their working capital away from them probably isn't helpful to them. So I've said to them, if they want to retain some, then they need to give. I mean, they normally do, but
I think the answer here is you want a more fulsome breakdown of some of the costs, as Councillor Scott's asked. So I think that's fair, and that should be forthcoming. Yeah.
Can you please tell me what hydrological assets are?
Hydrology assets, and Mr Maxwell is the expert on that.
So, through you, Mr Chair, the gauging stations, flow recorders, climate stations, anything to do with water, all our data recorders, loggers, telemetry, and any of the sort of physical assets that are out in the field for collecting information about water-related activities. So we have quite an extensive network. I can't tell off the top of my head how many sites, but it's in excess of 100.
Okay. Councillor Dick.
Mr Chairman, Paul, I wonder if you could check page 109 of the detailed report, transport, your revenue, direct charges, which is fares for public transport, actual 12/13/80, budgeted 92 for 13/14, and actual for 13/14 65. It's just not. It's not consistent with the pattern of increased patronage.
This is one.